Pick it up, Zaria. Every last shard. On your knees like you belong there. Celine Varnier's voice sliced through the opulent Manhattan penthouse, her words dripping with contempt as Zaria Nkrumah, a law student turned maid, stared at the shattered crystal glass on the marble floor. The air grew heavy with humiliation, each jagged piece reflecting Zaria's quiet dignity and Celine's unchecked cruelty. Torin Caldwell, the billionaire whose empire gleamed as brightly as this penthouse, stood frozen, his silence a choice that would haunt him. Yet what unfolded from this moment of shame would unravel secrets, ignite a spark of courage, and transform lives forever. Welcome to this gripping tale. Hit that subscribe button, share where and when you're tuning in, and stay until the end. A single act of defiance will shatter expectations and prove that love can rewrite even the most rigid destinies. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a crown of stars, its lights piercing the November dusk as Torin Caldwell adjusted his cufflinks in the mirrored expanse of his penthouse dressing room. At 35, he wore his wealth as effortlessly as the tailored charcoal suit hugging his frame. A tech billionaire whose name graced Forbes lists and Silicon Valley whispers. His dark hair, swept back with precision, framed hazel eyes that missed nothing in boardrooms, but often overlooked the human cost of his empire. Tonight, his penthouse at 1 buzzed with anticipation for a dinner with investors, a pivotal moment for his company, Horizon Innovations. Success was his birthright, inherited from a father who taught him that money silenced all problems, except perhaps those of the soul. Below, in the sleek kitchen of black marble and chrome, Zaria Nkrumah moved with quiet precision. At 28, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who knew her worth, even if the world rarely acknowledged it. Her navy uniform, pressed to perfection, clung to her warm brown skin, her natural hair pulled into a neat bun that spoke of pride in details she could control. A law student by night, Zaria cleaned houses by day to fund her dream of fighting for workers' rights. Her dark eyes, sharp with intelligence, scanned the countertops, ensuring every surface gleamed. She'd been at the Caldwell penthouse for only 3 weeks, but already she knew its rhythms: the clink of crystal, the hum of wealth, the weight of being invisible. Zaria! Celine Varnier's voice cut through the air, sharp as the edge of the crystal glass Zaria held. Celine stood in the doorway, her cream-colored designer dress flowing like liquid silk, her blonde hair cascading in waves that cost more than Zaria's monthly rent. At 32, Celine was a fashion icon, her blue eyes cold with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. That glass better be spotless. These investors expect perfection, and I won't have you embarrassing me. Yes, ma'am, Zaria replied, her voice steady, though her chest tightened. She polished the glass with care, her hands steady despite the sting of Celine's tone. Pride is in the work, her mother Imani always said, not in what they think of you. But pride was hard to hold when every word from Celine felt like a lash. The penthouse buzzed with preparations. Caterers darted through the dining room, arranging silverware worth more than Zaria's textbooks. Torin descended the spiral staircase, his presence commanding even in silence. He nodded absently at Celine, his mind already on stock options and merger terms. Everything set for tonight? He asked, his voice smooth but distant. Of course, Celine purred, slipping her arm through his. Though I still don't see why we need her. She flicked her gaze toward Zaria. When a machine could do the job without breaking things. Her laugh was light, but it cut deep. Zaria's hand faltered, and the glass slipped, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. Shards scattered like stars across the dark stone, glinting accusingly. Her heart sank. Not now. Not with them watching. She knelt to gather the pieces, her fingers trembling as she reached for the largest fragment. What have you done? Celine's voice was a blade, her face twisting with disgust. That was baccarat crystal, worth more than you'll ever make. You're clumsy, useless. She stopped, her lips curling into a cruel smile. No rags, no gloves. Pick it up with your hands, Zaria. Every last shard, on your knees like you belong there. Zaria froze, the words searing into her. Her eyes flicked to Torin, standing at the edge of the kitchen, his expensive shoes gleaming against the marble. His face was unreadable, but his silence screamed louder than Celine's venom. Say something, Zaria thought, her heart pounding. See me. But Torin's hazel eyes remained fixed on the floor, as if the broken glass held all the answers he couldn't find. The air grew thick with humiliation. Zaria's hands, calloused from years of work, reached for the shards. A sharp edge sliced her palm, and blood welled, mixing with the crystal's cold clarity. She bit her lip to stifle a gasp, her pride warring with survival. This job paid 3 times her old one, enough to cover her tuition, her mother's medication, her rent in Harlem. Quitting wasn't an option. Survive, she told herself, echoing Imani's mantra. You've endured worse. That's better, Celine said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Maybe now you'll learn to be more careful. She turned to Torin, her smile softening. Darling, the investors will be here soon. You should review the talking points. Torin nodded, his jaw tight, but he didn't move. His eyes lingered on Zaria's hands, on the blood smearing the marble, on the quiet strength in her bowed head. Something stirred in his chest, a flicker of shame, a memory of Naima Essien, the housekeeper who'd raised him when his parents were too busy building empires to notice their son. Naima, with her warm laugh and fierce kindness, would have been horrified by this scene. Why am I standing here, Torin thought, his hands clenching at his sides. Why am I letting this happen? From the dining room came the sound of footsteps. Eleanor Grayson, a neighbor and longtime family friend, entered with her usual poise. Her gray hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp with the wisdom of 68 years. She stopped short, taking in the scene. Zaria on her knees, blood on her hands, Celine's triumphant stance, and Torin's damning silence. Oh my, Eleanor whispered, her voice heavy with disapproval. Just a small accident, Celine said smoothly, her smile never wavering. Nothing that can't be handled properly. Zaria's cheeks burned, but she kept working, gathering shards as if her life depended on it. Each piece was a reminder of her place in this world, one where her dreams of justice, her late-night law studies, her mother's sacrifices could be reduced to this moment of degradation. They see me as nothing, she thought, her fingers slick with blood. But I'm more than this. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Torin, her eyes narrowing. Perhaps we could provide some proper cleaning materials, she suggested, her tone firm but measured. That won't be necessary, Celine replied, her voice icy. This is about accountability. Torin's stomach churned. He wanted to speak, to stop this, to be the man Naima had believed he could be. But years of avoiding confrontation, of preserving his polished life, kept him rooted. Coward, the word echoed in his mind, sharp as the glass Zaria held. As Zaria collected the final shard, her hands trembling with pain and rage, the doorbell chimed. The investors had arrived, their voices carrying laughter and privilege through the penthouse. Celine swept out to greet them, leaving Zaria alone with her blood and her dignity. Torin lingered a moment longer, his eyes meeting Zaria's for a fleeting second. In her gaze, he saw not just pain, but a challenge, a demand to be seen as human. Then she looked away, and he turned to join the world he'd been raised to rule, carrying the weight of his silence like a stone in his chest. This moment, this injustice, would be the spark that changed everything. But for now, the penthouse gleamed, the investors smiled, and Zaria Nkrumah bled alone on a marble floor, her dreams burning brighter than ever against the darkness of her humiliation. The penthouse was silent now, save for the distant hum of Manhattan's pulse beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Torin Caldwell sat alone in his study, the glow of a single desk lamp casting shadows across the mahogany walls. The investors' dinner had ended hours ago, their laughter and clinking glasses fading into a hollow echo in his mind. At 35, he'd built an empire at Horizon Innovations, but tonight, success tasted like ash. His tailored suit, now unbuttoned at the collar, felt like a costume, a disguise for the man he feared he'd become. He swirled a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light, but he couldn't bring himself to drink. His thoughts were trapped in the kitchen, on Zaria Nkrumah's bloodied hands, on the shards of crystal that had cut deeper than her skin. Torin's gaze drifted to a small, tarnished frame tucked behind a stack of financial journals on a shelf. He reached for it, his fingers brushing the worn silver as if it might burn. The photograph inside held a younger Torin, barely 10, his hazel eyes bright with unspoiled trust. Beside him stood Naima Essen, her warm smile radiating through the faded image. Her dark skin glowed against the simple blue dress she wore. Her hands, one resting gently on his shoulder, calloused from years of cleaning houses to support her family in Ghana. Naima had been more than a housekeeper. She'd been his anchor, the one who bandaged his scraped knees, taught him to dream beyond his father's cold ambition, and showed him that kindness was a strength, not a weakness. "You're more than your money, Torin," she'd said once, her voice soft but firm. "Don't let it define you." But he had. The memory twisted like a knife. Naima would have stormed into that kitchen tonight, her fierce eyes silencing Celine's cruelty. She would have knelt beside Zaria, handed her gloves, and reminded her that no one's worth was measured by broken glass. Torin, though, had stood frozen, his silence a betrayal of everything Naima had taught him. He set the frame down, his hands trembling. Why didn't I stop it? The question gnawed at him, each iteration louder than the last. He'd built a life avoiding conflict, smoothing edges, preserving the polished facade of success. But tonight, that facade cracked, revealing a coward beneath. Across the city, in a cramped Harlem apartment, Zaria Nkrumah sat on the edge of her bed, the dim light of a single bulb flickering overhead. The November chill seeped through the thin walls, but she barely noticed. Her hands, bandaged now, ached with every movement, the cuts from the crystal a cruel reminder of the evening's humiliation. Her navy uniform hung neatly in the corner, a symbol of survival she both cherished and resented. At 28, Zaria had fought for every inch of her life, her law degree, her mother Imani's medical bills, her dream of a world where workers like her weren't disposable. Tonight, though, that dream felt like a taunt. She stared at her open textbook, Labor Law and Justice, its pages dog-eared from late-night study sessions. Her dream of becoming a lawyer, of building a firm that fought for people like her, had kept her going through years of scrubbing floors and swallowing pride. But Celine's words, "On your knees like you belong there," echoed in her mind, each syllable a blow to her resolve. She thought of quitting, of walking away from the Caldwell penthouse and its gilded cruelty. But the math was merciless. $200 for Imani's medication, $600 for rent, or $200 for tuition. This job, with its generous pay, was her lifeline. "You carry your dignity inside, baby," Imani's voice rang in her memory. "No one can take that unless you let them." Zaria stood, pacing the small room, her white sneakers squeaking against the worn linoleum. She stopped at the cracked mirror above her dresser, her reflection showing a woman forged in fire. Dark eyes fierce with determination, lips set in a line that refused to break. She wouldn't let Celine win. Not tonight, not ever. Tomorrow she'd return to the penthouse, her head high, her work impeccable. She'd clean their floors, polish their wealth, and hold fast to her dream. "I'm more than their maid," she told herself, wrapping her bandaged hands around a mug of tea. "I'm Zaria Nkrumah, and I'll outlast their cruelty." Back in the penthouse, Torin rose from his chair, the bourbon untouched. He crossed to the window, Manhattan's lights sprawling before him like a map of his achievements. But the city's glitter couldn't erase the image of Zaria's blood on his kitchen floor, her quiet strength as she endured Celine's venom. He thought of Naima again, her lessons about seeing people, really seeing them. "The world's full of invisible folks, Torin," she'd said, stirring gumbo in their old Brooklyn brownstone. "Your job is to notice them." He hadn't noticed Zaria tonight, not until it was too late, and that failure burned hotter than any boardroom loss. He returned to his desk, pulling out a leather-bound notebook he hadn't touched in years. Inside were Naima's words, scribbled in his teenage hand. Quotes about courage, about justice, about being the man she believed he could be. "Wealth buys power, but only character buys respect." He traced the faded ink, his chest tight with regret. Celine's cruelty wasn't just her own, it was his too, for letting it happen in his home. He'd chosen comfort over courage, and the weight of that choice was crushing. Zaria, meanwhile, sat at her small kitchen table, her textbook open but unread. She thought of her mother, Imani, who'd worked double shifts as a nurse's aide to put Zaria through high school. Imani's strength was Zaria's inheritance, a fire that no penthouse could extinguish. She remembered the pride in her mother's eyes when Zaria enrolled in law school, the way Imani had hugged her and whispered, "You're gonna change the world, baby." That pride kept Zaria grounded even now. She bandaged her hands tighter, wincing but resolute. Tomorrow she'd face Celine's scorn again, but she'd do it with the knowledge that every floor she cleaned brought her closer to her goal. In the penthouse, Torin closed the notebook, his decision crystallizing in the quiet. He couldn't undo tonight, but he could change tomorrow. He thought of Zaria's eyes, fierce, unbroken, demanding to be seen. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he knew she deserved better than his silence. Naima's voice echoed in his mind, urging him to act, to be the man she'd raised. "I'll make this right," he vowed, his fingers tightening around the photograph of her smile. The city outside pulsed with indifference, but inside Torin's study, a spark of resolve ignited, a spark that would soon set fire to the carefully constructed walls of his world. The morning sun bathed Torin Caldwell's Manhattan penthouse in a golden haze, its rays glinting off the polished chrome fixtures and casting long shadows across the black marble floors. The air was crisp with the promise of a new day, but for Zaria Nkrumah, it carried the weight of yesterday's wounds. Her bandaged hands ached as she wheeled her cleaning cart through the front door. Torin's insistence, a small rebellion against Celine's rule of the service entrance. At 28, Zaria moved with the quiet grace of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile spaces. Her navy uniform a shield, her dark eyes sharp with resolve. Law school notes waited in her bag, a reminder of the dream that kept her here, scrubbing floors for a woman who saw her as less than human. Celine Varnier was gone, whisked away to a fashion gala in Paris, her absence a rare reprieve. The penthouse felt lighter without her sharp voice, but Zaria remained on guard. She began her work in the living room, dusting the mahogany shelves with meticulous care, each stroke a defiance of the humiliation etched into her palms. The silence was broken by the soft tread of footsteps. Torin descending the spiral staircase, his usual suit traded for a simple white shirt and jeans. His hazel eyes, usually distant with the weight of his empire, held something new, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, or curiosity. "Zaria," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Let me help today." She froze, her cloth hovering over a crystal figurine. Help? The word felt like a trap, a test she couldn't afford to fail. "Mr. Caldwell, that's not necessary," she replied, her tone professional but wary. "I've got everything under control." Torin stepped closer, his presence filling the room like the scent of his cedar cologne. "I want to," he insisted, his voice earnest. I need to understand what you do. Please." His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw not the billionaire, but a man grappling with something he couldn't name. Against her better judgment, Zaria nodded, handing him a microfiber cloth. "Start with the bookshelves. Top to bottom, gentle strokes. Don't smudge." He took the cloth like it was a foreign object, his movements clumsy but determined. Zaria watched, half amused, half suspicious, as he fumbled with a first edition novel, leaving streaks on the leather binding. "Not like that," she said, stepping beside him. "Like this." She guided his hand, her fingers brushing his briefly, a spark of warmth that made her pull back quickly. "Don't get too close," she warned herself. "He's still one of them." Torin followed her lead, his focus intense, as if dusting were a merger negotiation. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable, a shared space where words felt unnecessary. Zaria moved to the windows, wiping away smudges with practiced ease, her reflection a reminder of her mother Imani's mantra. Work with pride no matter who's watching. But Torin was watching, and his gaze wasn't dismissive. It was curious, almost reverent. "Why law?" he asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Zaria paused, her cloth still against the glass. The question felt personal, invasive, but his tone held no judgment, only genuine interest. She weighed her response, guarding her dreams like fragile glass. "To fight for people like me," she said finally. People who work hard, who deserve respect but get none. I want to build a firm that protects workers' rights. Torin stopped dusting, turning to face her fully. That's ambitious, he said, and there was no condescension in his voice, only admiration. My housekeeper, Naima Essian, she, she believed in justice too. She raised me when my parents were too busy building Horizon. She taught me that people matter more than profits. But I forgot that somewhere along the way. Zaria's guard softened, just a fraction. His words carried a weight she recognized. Regret, the kind that came from betraying someone you loved. What was she like? She asked, surprising herself. Torin's face lit up, his hazel eyes softening as he leaned against the shelf. Naima was fierce. From Ghana, she came here with nothing but dreams for her family. She'd sing while she cleaned, make our house feel like a home. She saw me, you know? Not just the rich kid, but me. His voice cracked and Zaria felt a pang in her chest. She thought of Imani, her mother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give Zaria a chance. My mom, Imani, she's like that, Zaria said, her voice quieter now. She's a nurse's aide. Taught me that no work is small if it's done with love. But love doesn't pay bills, so here I am. Torin nodded, his expression unreadable but intense. You're more than this job, Zaria. I saw that yesterday, even if I didn't act like it. His words hit her like a wave, stirring a dangerous hope. She pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. We're not here to talk about me, she said, moving to the coffee table. Polish in circles, not streaks. Like this. He mimicked her, his effort earnest but unpracticed. They worked side by side, the rhythm of their movements sinking in a way that felt almost natural. Zaria showed him how to clean the brass lamp bases, how to fold napkins for the dining table, each lesson a small bridge between their worlds. Torin listened, asked questions, his billionaire arrogance replaced by a humility she hadn't expected. This is harder than it looks, he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow after wrestling with a stubborn stain. Most things are, Zaria replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as a maid, but as a person with skill, with purpose. The moment was fleeting, but it lingered in her chest, warm and dangerous. He's still her fiancé, she reminded herself, glancing at the empty space where Celine's presence loomed like a storm. As they moved to the dining room, Torin spoke again, his voice tentative. Naima would have liked you. She'd have said you've got fire in your soul. Zaria's breath caught. She wanted to dismiss it, to keep her walls high, but his sincerity cracked something open. Maybe, she said, her eyes on the chandelier she was polishing. But fire doesn't mean much if it can't burn through places like this. Torin paused, his cloth still, his gaze heavy with something unspoken. Maybe it can, he said softly. Maybe it just needs a spark. The words hung between them, electric and fragile, a promise neither was ready to name. Outside, Manhattan roared with its relentless ambition, but in the quiet of the penthouse, two people from opposite worlds began to see each other, really see each other, for the first time. And in that seeing, something began to shift, something that would soon challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the lives they were meant to lead. The Manhattan penthouse shimmered under the midday sun, its polished surfaces reflecting the frenetic energy of a city that never paused. Zaria Nkrumah moved through the dining room with her usual precision, her bandaged hands steady as she arranged crystal stemware for an upcoming gala. The morning with Torin Caldwell had left a lingering warmth in her chest, a dangerous flicker of connection she couldn't afford to nurture. At 28, she knew better than to trust the kindness of a billionaire, especially one engaged to Celine Varnier. Yet his words, his clumsy attempts at cleaning, his stories of Naima Essian had cracked her defenses, exposing a hope she'd long buried. Focus, she told herself, aligning a fork with military precision. Dreams don't pay bills, and men like him don't choose women like you. The front door slammed open, shattering the quiet. Celine swept in like a storm, her Paris trip cut short, her blonde hair still perfect despite the transatlantic flight. Her designer coat, a deep emerald that screamed wealth, billowed as she dropped her luggage with a thud. Torin, darling, she called, her voice sharp with expectation. Zaria's stomach clenched, her body tensing as if bracing for a blow. She kept her head down, polishing a silver candelabra, hoping to blend into the background. But Celine's blue eyes, cold as winter, locked onto her like a predator spotting prey. "You're still here," Celine said, her tone laced with disdain. "I'd have thought you'd learned your lesson after the crystal disaster." Zaria's hands tightened around the cloth, the cuts beneath her bandages stinging. She forced her voice to stay even. "Yes, ma'am. Just finishing the dining room." Celine's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "Good. Keep it that way. I need this place flawless for the gala." Torin appeared at the top of the spiral staircase, his casual jeans traded for a crisp navy shirt, his hazel eyes flickering with unease. "Celine, you're back early," he said, descending with measured steps. His voice was calm, but Zaria caught the tension in his jaw, the way his gaze darted to her before settling on his fiancée. "I couldn't stay away," Celine purred, crossing to him and kissing his cheek with possessive ease. "Paris was divine, but I missed you, and I have plans for the gala. Our engagement announcement will steal the show." Her words were bright, but her eyes slid to Zaria, sharp with suspicion. "Though it seems you've been keeping busy without me." Zaria's heart thudded. She focused on the candelabra, willing herself invisible, but Celine's voice grew colder. "I heard interesting things from Eleanor Grayson. She mentioned seeing you and our maid looking rather cozy yesterday, working side by side, sharing stories. How quaint." The accusation hung in the air, heavy with menace. Zaria's breath caught, her mind racing. Eleanor, how much did she see? The neighbor's kind eyes flashed in her memory, but so did her clear view of the penthouse windows. Torin's face hardened, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "Eleanor must have misunderstood," he said, his voice steady but edged with steel. "I was observing Zaria's work. She's exceptional at what she does." The words were a shield, but Zaria felt exposed, as if Celine could see every moment of their shared laughter, every glance that had lingered too long. "Observing?" Celine's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Is that what we're calling it? Because it sounds like you've forgotten the boundaries of this household." She turned to Zaria, her smile venomous. "You're here to clean, not to play house with my fiancé, or do I need to remind you of your place again?" Zaria's cheeks burned, the humiliation of the crystal incident flooding back. She met Celine's gaze, her dark eyes blazing with suppressed fury. "I know my place, Miss Varnier," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "I'm here to do my job." The words were a lifeline, a reminder of the tuition bills, her mother's medication, the dream that kept her tethered to this penthouse. "Then do it and stop overstepping," Celine snapped. She turned to Torin, her tone softening but no less commanding. "Darling, we can't have staff who don't know their limits. Fire her now, or the gala, our engagement, will be canceled." The ultimatum landed like a thunderclap, the air in the room crackling with tension. Torin's hands clenched at his sides, his hazel eyes locking onto Zaria's for a fleeting moment. She saw conflict there, guilt, anger, something deeper she couldn't name. "No," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Zaria stays. She's done nothing wrong." The words were a lifeline, but they came at a cost. Zaria's heart pounded, torn between gratitude and dread. He's standing up for me, she thought, but the price of his defiance loomed large. Celine's face twisted, her composure fracturing. "You're choosing her over me?" she hissed, stepping closer to Torin, her emerald coat swirling like a warning. "Over our future? Think carefully, Torin. You know what's at stake." Her voice dropped, a whispered threat meant only for him, but Zaria caught the edge of it. Power, status, the life they'd been building. Torin's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. "This isn't about choosing anyone. It's about fairness." His words were firm, but Zaria saw the cost in his eyes, the strain of defying a world he'd been raised to navigate without ripples. She wanted to believe in his stand, but doubt gnawed at her. He'll back down, she thought. Men like him always do. Celine's gaze darted between them, her suspicion hardening into certainty. "Fine," she said, her voice icy, "but this isn't over." She stormed toward the living room, her heels clicking like gunfire on the marble. Torin exhaled, his shoulders sagging, but he didn't follow her. Instead, he looked at Zaria, his expression raw with apology. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You shouldn't have to endure that." Zaria's throat tightened. His words were sincere, but they couldn't erase the reality of her position. "I need this job, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "But I can't afford to be your cause." She turned back to the candelabra, her hands shaking as she polished, each stroke a reminder of her fragility in this world. "He stood up for me, but for how long?" Torin lingered, as if wanting to say more, but the weight of Celine's threat hung between them. "I'll handle it," he said finally, his voice low, almost to himself. He walked away, leaving Zaria alone with her card and her wounds, both visible and unseen. Outside, Manhattan's skyline gleamed with indifferent beauty, but inside the penthouse, a battle line had been drawn. Zaria knew this confrontation was only the beginning, and the cost of Torin's defiance would soon demand a reckoning, one that could shatter her dreams or just maybe set her free. The Manhattan penthouse stood silent, its opulent surfaces gleaming under the soft glow of recessed lights. But the air felt heavy with the aftermath of Celine Varnier's ultimatum. Zaria Nkrumah worked alone in the guest suite, her bandaged hands folding linens with mechanical precision. At 28, she learned to bury pain beneath purpose, but the confrontation with Celine lingered like a bruise. Torin Caldwell's defense had sparked a flicker of hope, but Zaria knew better than to trust it. Men like him, billionaires with worlds to lose, rarely chose courage over comfort. She focused on the task, smoothing a silk pillowcase, her dark eyes fixed on the dream that kept her tethered to this job. A law degree, a firm to fight for workers' rights, a life where she'd never kneel again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the quiet. An unknown number flashed on the screen, and Zaria's heart stuttered. She answered, her voice steady despite a creeping dread. "Zaria Nkrumah." "Ms. Nkrumah, this is Dr. Elena Voss from Lenox Hill Hospital," a calm voice said. "I'm calling about your mother, Imani. She's been in a car accident, a serious one. She's in surgery now, but you should come as soon as possible." The words hit like a physical blow, stealing Zaria's breath. Imani, her rock, her fierce advocate, the woman who'd worked herself to the bone for Zaria's future, was fighting for her life. The room spun, the penthouse's luxury fading into a blur of panic. "I'm on my way," Zaria managed, her voice barely a whisper. She grabbed her bag, leaving her cleaning cart abandoned, and sent a quick text to Torin. "Family emergency. My mother's in the hospital. I need time off. No pleasantries, no apologies. She couldn't afford them now." She ran for the elevator, her sneakers pounding against the marble, the weight of survival pressing harder than ever. "I can't lose her," she thought, the city's lights blurring through tears as she hailed a cab to Lenox Hill. Across town, Torin sat in his office at Horizon Innovations, the glow of his computer screen casting sharp shadows across his face. The Singapore deal was unraveling, but his mind was elsewhere, on Zaria's blazing eyes, on Celine's venomous threat, on the man he'd failed to be. His phone pinged with Zaria's message, and his heart sank. Imani, hospital. He stood grabbing his coat, the deal forgotten. He needed to be there, to do something, anything, to make up for his silence in the kitchen. Meanwhile, a storm was brewing beyond the penthouse. Eleanor Grayson, the sharp-eyed neighbor who'd witnessed Zaria's humiliation, had taken to social media. Her post, shared thousands of times, was a searing indictment. In a Manhattan penthouse, a young black woman, a law student with dreams of justice, was forced to clean broken glass with her bare hands while the elite watched. This is not just a story of one maid, it's a story of a system that dehumanizes. Her name is Zaria Nkrumah, and she deserves better. Dignity for all. The post included a photo of Zaria from her law school profile, her smile radiant, her eyes alight with purpose. It spread like wildfire, picked up by local blogs, sparking outrage and calls to boycott Horizon Innovations. Torin arrived at Lenox Hill, his tailored coat out of place among the hospital's sterile chaos. He found Zaria in the waiting room, her green sweater a stark contrast to the pale walls, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her face was a mask of strength, but her eyes betrayed a raw fear that twisted something deep in Torin's chest. "Zaria," he said, his voice soft but urgent. She looked up, surprise flickering before her expression hardened. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone clipped. "What are you doing here?" "I got your message. I wanted to help." He pulled an envelope from his pocket, thick with cash. "This is for Imani's medical bills. Whatever you need, it's yours." His gesture was earnest, but Zaria's eyes narrowed, her pride a fortress against his charity. "I don't need your money," she said, her voice low but fierce. "I've managed this long without handouts. I'll manage now." She stood, her small frame radiating defiance. "My mother's in surgery. I need to focus on her, not your guilt." Torin's face fell, but he pressed on, his voice cracking with vulnerability. "Zaria, it's not guilt. It's because I—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. He took a breath, his hazel eyes locking onto hers. "I'm in love with you." The confession hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Zaria's breath hitched, her heart racing with a mix of shock and disbelief. Love. The word felt like a betrayal, a cruel trick from a man whose world could never include her. "You're engaged," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "You stood by while Celine humiliated me, and now you think love fixes that?" Torin flinched, the truth of her words cutting deeper than any boardroom loss. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raw. "I should have stopped her. I should have fought for you then, and I'm fighting now. I don't expect you to believe me, but I need you to know." Zaria's eyes searched his, looking for deception, for the polished lies of a man used to getting what he wanted. But all she saw was anguish, a man unraveling under the weight of his failures. "Words don't change what happened," she said, turning away, her gaze fixed on the hospital doors where Imani's fate hung in the balance. "I need to be here for my mom. That's what matters." Torin nodded, stepping back, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'll be here if you need me," he said softly. "Not as your boss, but as someone who cares." He hesitated, then walked away, leaving Zaria alone with her fear and her resolve. In the quiet of the waiting room, Zaria clutched her mother's old rosary, its beads worn smooth by years of Imani's prayers. The social media post, the outrage, Torin's confession, all of it faded against the reality of her mother's fight. But something had shifted. Torin's words, reckless and impossible, had planted a seed of doubt. What if he means it, she thought, then pushed it away. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when survival demanded everything she had. Outside, Manhattan churned with its relentless rhythm, but in that sterile room, Zaria held fast to the only truth that mattered. Imani was her world, and no billionaire's promises could change that. The Manhattan penthouse buzzed with the frenetic energy of gala preparations, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across the marble floors. White orchids spilled from every corner, their elegance a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Torin Caldwell's chest. At 35, he stood at the edge of his empire, Horizon Innovations, facing a room of investors, board members, and Manhattan's elite, all gathered to celebrate his engagement to Celine Varnier. The weight of their expectations pressed against him, but his mind was elsewhere, on Zaria Nkrumah, sitting in a hospital room across town, her mother's life hanging by a thread. The viral social media post by Eleanor Grayson had ignited a firestorm, with dignity for all trending and Horizon's stock teetering as clients threatened to pull contracts. Torin's silence in the face of Zaria's humiliation had become a public reckoning, and tonight he would answer it. Celine swept through the room, her emerald gown shimmering like a beacon of triumph, her blonde hair a perfect cascade. "Torin, darling," she called, her voice bright but edged with control. "The photographer needs you for the announcement shots." Her blue eyes glittered with certainty, as if their future were already sealed. The ring, a 5-carat emerald to match her ambition, sat heavy in Torin's pocket, a symbol of a life he no longer wanted. "I love Zaria," he thought, the realization a blade cutting through years of complacency. "And I've been a coward long enough." He stepped to the center of the room, the crowd parting like a sea, their murmurs fading into expectant silence. Celine stood beside him, her smile radiant, unaware of the storm about to break. Torin cleared his throat, his hazel eyes scanning the faces. Investors who'd funded his empire, friends who'd toasted his success, a world that had shaped him but no longer defined him. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady but resonant with purpose. "Tonight was meant to celebrate an engagement, but I have something else to say." Celine's smile faltered, her hand tightening on his arm. Torin pulled away gently, his gaze unwavering. "3 weeks ago, in my home, a woman was humiliated while I stood by and did nothing. Her name is Zaria Nkrumah, and she deserved better. From me, from all of us. I failed her, and in doing so, I failed the values I was raised to uphold." The room went still, glasses pausing mid-sip, eyes widening. Celine's face drained of color, her lips parting in shock. "I'm canceling this engagement," Torin continued, his voice growing stronger. "Celine, you deserve someone who can give you the life you want, but that's not me. I've been living a lie, prioritizing comfort over courage. That ends tonight." A gasp rippled through the crowd, cameras flashing as whispers erupted. Celine's eyes blazed, but Torin pressed on. "Horizon Innovations will implement new labor policies, living wages, benefits, and respect for every worker. Because Zaria and every person like her isn't just the help. They're the backbone of our world." The room exploded into murmurs, some outraged, others awestruck. Celine stormed out, her heels echoing like gunfire. But Torin felt lighter than he ever had. He turned to his assistant, handing over the ring. "Return this," he said, then left the gala, the weight of his old life falling away with each step. He had one place to go. Lenox Hill Hospital, where Zaria waited, where he could prove his words weren't empty. At the hospital, Zaria sat beside Imani's bed, the steady beep of monitors a fragile lifeline. Her mother's surgery had been successful, but recovery would be long and costly. Zaria's hands, still bandaged, clutched Imani's, her dark eyes heavy with exhaustion, but burning with resolve. The social media post had sparked a crowdfunding campaign, raising $50,000 for Imani's care, a testament to strangers' kindness that both humbled and emboldened her. But Torin's confession, "I'm in love with you," echoed in her mind, a dangerous temptation she couldn't trust. "He's a billionaire," she reminded herself. "His world doesn't bend for mine." The door creaked open, and Torin stepped in, his suit rumpled, his hazel eyes raw with determination. Zaria stiffened, her heart racing despite her resolve. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice guarded, "I told you I don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Torin said, his voice low but fervent. He held no envelope this time, only a folder. "I canceled the engagement. Celine's gone, and I made a public commitment to change how Horizon treats its workers. But that's not why I'm here." He set the folder on the bedside table, his hands trembling slightly. "This is a scholarship proposal, full funding for your law degree, no strings attached, and a partnership offer to help you build your nonprofit for workers' rights. I don't want to save you, Zaria. I want to work with you, to learn from you." Zaria's breath caught, her eyes searching his for deceit, but finding only sincerity. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why risk everything now?" "Because you showed me who I could be," Torin said, stepping closer, his voice thick with emotion. "Naima raised me to see people, to fight for what's right. I forgot that until you. I love you, Zaria, not as a project, but as the strongest, most brilliant woman I've ever known. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I have to earn it. But will you let me try?" Zaria's heart pounded, torn between fear and a fragile hope. She thought of Imani, of her own dreams, of the crowdfunding campaign that proved people could care. Torin's words weren't just promises, they were actions, backed by a public stand that risked his empire. Slowly she nodded, her eyes glistening. "You can try," she said, her voice firm but soft. "But it's a long road, Torin, and I don't trust easily." He smiled, a flicker of relief breaking through his intensity. "I'll take that road, however long it is." Outside, Manhattan's lights twinkled, indifferent to the revolution unfolding in that hospital room. Zaria felt the weight of her mother's hand in hers. The folder on the table, a bridge to a future she'd barely dared imagine. Torin's stand had silenced a room of elites, but it was this moment, quiet, raw, real, that would redefine them both. The Harlem skyline glowed softly under the December sunset, a tapestry of hope woven through the bustling streets below. The newly opened Nkrumah Community Center stood at the heart of the neighborhood, its brick facade adorned with a vibrant mural of hands clasped in unity. Inside, Zaria Nkrumah Caldwell stood beside a ribbon stretched across the entrance, her dark eyes alight with pride. At 29, she wore a simple navy dress, her natural hair framed by a gold head wrap, a nod to her Ghanaian heritage and her mother Imani's strength. The center was her vision, a haven for job training, childcare, and small business loans, built to uplift the community that had raised her. Torin Caldwell stood at her side, his hazel eyes warm with admiration, his hand finding hers in a quiet promise of partnership. A year had passed since the night Torin dismantled his engagement to Celine Varnier, his public stand at the gala, sending shockwaves through Manhattan's elite. The fallout had been fierce. Investors pulled funding, the board demanded his resignation, and socialites whispered of his betrayal. But Torin had walked away from Horizon Innovations, liquidating a portion of his shares to fund the community center and Zaria's dream. Now at 36, he wore a simple sweater and slacks, his billionaire polish traded for a life of purpose. The crowd gathered, local families, reporters, and Eleanor Grayson, whose viral post had sparked this transformation, cheered as Imani, fully recovered from her accident, stepped forward to cut the ribbon. Imani's hands, steady despite the scars of her ordeal, sliced through the red silk, her smile radiant. The crowdfunding campaign, ignited by Eleanor's advocacy, had raised over $100,000, covering her medical bills and fueling the center's early days. "This is for Harlem," Imani said, her voice carrying the weight of a lifetime's resilience. "For every person who's been told they're not enough." Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, but Zaria's gaze was on her mother, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We made it," she thought, squeezing Torin's hand. The center buzzed with life. Children laughed in the daycare wing, adults attended coding classes upstairs, and Zaria's nonprofit, Dignity Advocates, occupied the top floor. Her organization, now employing 50 workers with full benefits and profit sharing, fought for labor rights across New York's service industry. Zaria had graduated from law school 6 months earlier, her degree funded by Torin's scholarship, her valedictorian speech a rallying cry for justice. Reporters swarmed her now, their questions sharp but respectful. "Mrs. Caldwell," one called, "how does it feel to see your vision come to life?" Zaria smiled, the title still sparking joy. "It feels like proof that when people choose courage over comfort, the impossible becomes real," she said, her voice steady but warm. "This center isn't just mine. It's Harlem's, built by every hand that lifted us up." Torin's arm slipped around her waist, a silent anchor. His own transformation had become a case study at Columbia Law, where Zaria now guest lectured on ethical labor practices. Another reporter pressed forward. "Mr. Caldwell, what about the backlash from leaving Horizon Innovations?" Torin's response was calm, practiced. "Horizon continues under leadership that aligns with its original vision. I chose to build something new with my wife because communities deserve more than corporate promises. They deserve action." The words were true, though the journey hadn't been easy. Legal battles with the board had dragged on for months, and old friends had turned their backs. But Torin had found allies in unexpected places. Eleanor, who now ran the center's volunteer program, and his former assistant Jalen, who'd launched a catering business serving the center's events. Celine's shadow lingered in the questions. "Any comment on Miss Varnier's new engagement?" a reporter asked. Zaria tensed, but Torin's voice was gracious. "Celine's found someone who shares her vision of life. I wish her well." It was true, Celine had married a Wall Street tycoon in a lavish Hampton ceremony, her name fading from their world as quickly as it had risen. Zaria felt no bitterness, only relief that some endings cleared the way for new beginnings. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor approached, her gray eyes twinkling. "You've built something extraordinary," she said, gesturing to the bustling center. "That post was just a spark. This is the fire." Zaria hugged her, whispering, You showed the world what justice looks like. We just followed through. Eleanor's advocacy had earned her a city award, but she remained Harlem's watchful guardian, her phone always ready to expose the next injustice. Later, in their modest Harlem apartment, Zaria and Torin sat at a worn wooden table, reviewing applications for the center's next round of business loans. The apartment was small, a far cry from the penthouse Torin had sold, but it was alive with love. Photos of their courthouse wedding, Imani's woven tapestries, a framed picture of Naima Essien on the mantel. "Do you miss it?" Zaria asked, her eyes on a loan proposal for a bakery. "The penthouse, the galas, the power?" Torin considered the question, his hazel eyes softening. "I miss the ease of it," he admitted, "but not the emptiness. I'd rather build this with you than rule a world that doesn't see people like Naima or you." His honesty, hard-won over months of late-night talks, eased the guilt Zaria sometimes felt for his sacrifices. She leaned across the table, her hand finding his. "Columbia offered me a teaching fellowship," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Full funding, 2 years, to develop labor law curriculum. They want dignity advocates as a case study." Torin's face lit up, his smile transforming him into the man who'd cleaned beside her a year ago. "That's incredible, Zaria. You're changing the world." He pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "I fell in love with your fire. I can't wait to see where it takes you." "And you?" she asked, resting against him. "What's next for Torin Caldwell?" "Expanding the center," he said, his voice steady. "More loans, more training, more chances for people to build their dreams, and coming home to you every night." They laughed, the sound filling their small home with warmth. Outside, Harlem pulsed with life, a city of fighters and dreamers. Inside, Zaria and Torin cleaned their apartment together, side by side, equals in a love that had rewritten their futures. Their revolution, born in a moment of injustice, fueled by courage, proved that love could conquer even the deepest divides, one dignified act at a time. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of Zaria and Torin, a story that reminds us that courage and love can shatter even the strongest barriers. Their transformation from injustice to equality inspires us to see the humanity in everyone, to fight for dignity, and to choose heart over privilege. We hope this tale sparks reflection. What does it mean to stand up for what's right in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's keep this conversation alive. Your support fuels these stories, so hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales that challenge, uplift, and transform. Thank you for being here. Until next time, keep believing in the power of change.